if a man opened the door for you or offered to carry your bag, for instance? Well, in an excerpt from his new book, Woke is Dead, Piers Morgan says what he calls radical feminist types have tried to poison gentlemanly gestures like holding doors, carrying heavy bags, or paying for dinner. Piers says they're a well-mannered expression of a man's respect for a woman, and most women appreciate what he calls a big part of what real masculinity is. So,
society is being taken backwards into like male and female roles. It just doesn't bother me in the slightest. What I find comical is to flog his book that Piers Morgan is painting himself as some kind of chivalrous knight, some gentleman who, is very, very going through life so upset that he opens doors for women, does all these lovely things, and some horrible radical feminists are not appreciating it. Whereas this radical feminist would appreciate anyone opening a door. Man, woman, whatever. I think good manners, as Colleen said, are the fundamental thing that means we've got a civilised society. But what I find comical about Piers' book is that only a few weeks ago, Christine and I had the misfortune to share a dinner table with Piers Morgan. We were at a very posh dinner in the City of London, and Christine and I were sitting right next to Piers Morgan. And as the people were making very important speeches, who talked all the way through it? Piers Morgan, who demanded wine when no wine was being served because there was a lull in the service. Piers Morgan. And then when the wine came, wanted champagne. So actually, Piers Morgan, try having a few manners before you tell women about chivalry.
Oh, C News, gather close, because tonight's tale is soaked in irony, ego, and the faint scent of champagne arrogance. The man at the centre of it all, none other than Piers Morgan, a name that could start a storm in a teacup and still complain the cup's too woke. His latest crusade comes wrapped in that oh-so-serious title, Woke is Dead, a book he swears is the salvation of modern manners. In his grand narrative, he's not just an author, he's a knight of outdated chivalry, defending the endangered art of holding doors, paying bills and carrying handbags like they're acts of divine nobility. And who, according to him, killed these gentlemanly graces? Those radical feminist types, of course. The villains of his fairy tale who dared to suggest that respect doesn't need to come gift-wrapped in condescension. But, dear listeners, let's savour the irony. The man preaching about civility is the same one who built a career out of shouting people down on national television. Piers Morgan lecturing on manners is like a fox opening a petting zoo, amusing, alarming, and just a touch tragic. The British press machine, always starved for drama, pounced on his new book like it was some kind of philosophical awakening. Headlines, panels, interviews. Oh, they treated Woke is Dead like scripture from the Gospel of the Grumpy. But behind the facade of courage and conviction was nothing more than nostalgia, dressed up as enlightenment. The yearning for a past where men did the bare minimum and called it virtue. He doesn't crave civility, he craves the clock to spin backward. In his world, chivalry isn't about respect. It's about control. About being praised for behaving decently. Now, dear listeners, brace yourselves for the scene that shattered the illusion, the infamous dinner. Ah yes, that glittering charity gala in the heart of London, filled with journalists, politicians, and the social elite. The night was meant for reflection, compassion, and quiet generosity. Enter Piers Morgan, the man who can turn silence into spectacle. Seated beside two women who would later recount their experience, he spent the evening turning the dinner into a one-man broadcast. As heartfelt speeches filled the room, tributes to children's hospitals, words of gratitude, Piers decided it was time for his own commentary. Jokes, interruptions, waves of his hand to summon the waitstaff like a Roman emperor. When the wine service lagged, he reportedly quipped, "Are we dry now?" As though dehydration were a scandal worthy of investigation. And when the wine finally came? Not good enough. Champagne, he demanded. Because of course he did. What's a sermon on respect without a side of self-indulgence? And this, dear listeners, is the same man who claims to be the last true gentleman in Britain. When politely asked to lower his voice, he reportedly replied, "I'm Piers Morgan. That's not confidence. That's theatre." You could almost hear the collective sigh of the table. A sound that said, "We are trapped in an ego documentary." It was loose women who told this tale to the world, not with fury but with that perfect British understatement. One of them began, "We had the misfortune to share a dinner table with Piers Morgan." That single line landed like a well-aimed arrow. The audience laughed, but it wasn't mockery. It was recognition. Because honestly, everyone knows a Piers Morgan. The man who mistakes noise for charm, who thinks shouting is a substitute for substance, who demands gratitude for gestures he ruins with his own arrogance. Now imagine it. Chandeliers glowing, speeches echoing, and in the middle, Piers holding court, unable to bear a moment that isn't about him. The man who stormed off Good Morning Britain because someone dared to challenge him, is now selling himself as a pillar of emotional restraint. The man who mocked mental health as woke weakness, is the same one who combusts on live television at the mildest disagreement. If hypocrisy were an Olympic sport, Piers wouldn't just win, he'd demand they build him a statue at the finish line. What the Loose Women panel did was nothing short of poetic justice. They didn't rant, they didn't rage. They simply told the story, and in doing so, they held up a mirror. And dear listeners, if there's one thing Piers Morgan can't handle, it's his own reflection. Not unless it's perfectly lit and smirking back in agreement. See, Piers thrives on outrage. It's his currency, his oxygen. Every feud, every viral meltdown is another notch on his fame belt. Meghan Markle, his favorite target, his obsession, the ghost haunting every headline he writes. Prince Harry, the co-star of his eternal grievance. And when he's called out, he hides behind that tired shield. "I'm just telling the truth." But he's not selling truth, dear listeners. He's selling attention. And attention, in his world, is more sacred than honesty. Woke is Dead isn't a cultural critique, it's a confession. Every chapter drips with nostalgia for a Britain that never really existed. One where men were gentlemen, women were grateful, and no one questioned who defined respect. He calls it common sense. The rest of us call it entitlement with better PR. When confronted, his defense is as predictable as the sunrise. Critics are woke snowflakes, dissenters are cancel culture crybabies. Ignore him, and he'll provoke until someone reacts. And when they finally do? He plays the victim, weeping about being silenced while sitting on multiple media empires. The man has more platforms than a subway station, yet insists he's being cancelled. It's not martyrdom, it's marketing. Let's be honest, see news. Piers Morgan isn't waging war on wokeness. He's fighting the slow, inevitable fade of his own relevance. He doesn't fear political correctness. He fears obscurity. His brand thrives on friction, and when the outrage cools, so does the spotlight. Chivalry in his hands becomes a weapon, not a gesture of grace, but a leash of control. You can't shout over women for decades, and then sell a book about respecting them. That's not gallantry, that's hypocrisy in hardcover. Even the book's cover tells the story. Piers, arms folded, chin raised, like he's about to mansplain the Magna Carta. The blurb hails him as fearless and unapologetic. Translation? Loud and proud of it. His fans lap it up, mistaking arrogance for authenticity. But real courage isn't about volume, it's about accountability. And accountability is one virtue Piers has never bothered to practice. Now picture that dinner again. The chandelier light, the clinking glasses, and Piers commanding attention while others speak of generosity and compassion. Every interruption another drumbeat of self-importance. Every laugh a deflection. Every "I'm Piers Morgan" a reminder that for him, silence isn't golden, it's terrifying, because silence means he's not the story. And that's exactly why the Loose Women moment stung. They didn't fight him, they simply exposed him. No insults, no fury. Just truth, softly spoken, and devastatingly effective. The audience didn't roar, they chuckled. Because they'd seen behind the curtain, and what stood there wasn't a knight in shining armor. It was a man terrified of fading relevance. Behind the bluster, the monologues, and the endless crusades, what remains is painfully simple. A man who cannot live without the echo of his own voice. He demands gratitude but offers none. Preaches respect but rarely practices it. condemns emotion while bursting with it daily. And as he rails that wokeness killed civility, the truth stands clearer than ever. It wasn't wokeness that buried decency. It was ego. His ego. So as Woke is Dead sits on the shelves, nestled between memoirs and manifestos, one question lingers like the aftertaste of cheap champagne. Is wokeness really the corpse he claims, or has chivalry simply died of embarrassment? Because if this tantrum in a tuxedo, is what passes for modern masculinity, then the knights of old must be turning in their graves. Politely, of course.